Right, everyone, we're going to make a start. Can I just check that everyone online can hear us okay? Can you give us a thumbs up or pop in the chat? I've got some nods, so I think we're okay. Perfect. So welcome, everyone, to our next Established Researcher Forum event, which we're very excited about. Me and the co-leads always have great fun on these days. So what we have here today is a panel from some people who have been recently promoted to Prof. And we also have some representatives from the university as well who are going to answer some questions about promotion to P1. So before we start, I just want to do some housekeeping. So there aren't any planned fire drills. If the fire alarm goes off for longer than 30 seconds, please evacuate quickly and quietly. And our muster point is under the concourse, so just across that bit of pavement. In terms of toilets, there's an accessible toilet across from the conference room, and the ladies and men's are next door. There's a prayer room in the Students' Union if you need it. And if there's anything else you need, we have our wonderful Amy over here who will be happy to help. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing. I'll just tell you a bit about how the event's going to work today. So we've got our wonderful panel. So I'm going to introduce them by name, and then we'll get them to spend 5 minutes each telling you about their experiences at the session. What we'll then do is field some questions, both from the audience in the room, the audience online, and we've also got some questions that people submitted in advance as well. What we'll then have some insights from John and Cathy, who will tell us their top tips for promotion, and then we'll have another question and answer session as well. Right, so without further ado, let me introduce the panel. So we're very fortunate that we've got Professor Meena Balasubramanian from Clinical Medicine. We have Professor Jason King from Biosciences. We have Professor Julia Moses from History, Philosophy and Digital Humanities. Professor Sam Rigby from Civil and Structural Engineering. And Professor Aidan While from Geography and Planning. So, right, I think what we'll do is we'll start from the further end from me. So that's you, isn't it, Aidan?
Okay, so
5 minutes.
Right, 5 minutes.
You just begin to the microphone.
Okay, so where would I start? I'm in geography and planning on the planning side. I was promoted to senior lecturer in 2007, so I might hold the record for the longest time taken to move from a senior lecturer up to a professor, and then recently promoted to professor in 2025. So I think it's about 18 years, which is a very long time. So, and it was sort of interesting, my pathway through. So after 2007, when I became senior lecturer, I did a number of senior roles in the department. So I was director of postgraduate research, and then I was director of research for 3 years. I was involved in the rep submission. I helped set up the Cross-Cutting Urban Institute, and then I was seconded to work for the Urban Institute. So I did quite a lot of things that were working at I guess, a fairly high level. And I felt that I ticked most of the boxes, but for me, sort of income generation was an issue, and I don't think income generation isn't the be all and end all. But I'd had grants, but I was sort of waiting on a large grant, and I took a strategic view to have a 5-year plan of sort of working towards a really large grant, which I eventually got, an ESRC grant as PI. And I was sort of waiting for that. I wasn't too bothered about promotion, actually. I was enjoying what I was doing, and that was more important to me than jumping through the hoops of promotion. So one of the things that happened is that I got overtaken by the ACP process. So when I was thinking of promotion and lots of my leadership roles, I guess, I wasn't thinking in an ACP framework. And then all of a sudden, when I was sort of suggested I go for a chair, so it was suggested I went for it, then I sort of found that I had to think about what I was doing in a different way. So, and just I wanted to make sort of 3 points about that. I sort of think that it's worth thinking about what the logic of the ACP is, and that reflection on sort of that coming in part the way through my process. And I think the ACP is to get us to think more strategically about what we do, with a greater emphasis on achieving things, putting a plan in place and achieving it and doing things. And if I had my time again when I was director of research, I might have set up what I did in a slightly different way. And I think that's one of the positive achievements of the ACP, is to make us think more sharply about what we do. Looking at the promotion process, it involves quite a lot of work, and I found that immensely rewarding, actually, a reflection on who I am, what I do, where I could sharpen my practices. I sort of think I could have made it a bit more simpler and more straightforward at the same time. And I think it does involve a lot of work, but it is about a strategic focus. So I went for leadership as one of my pillars. But it's about taking 2 or 3 elements of leadership and working that through. And I think I spend a lot of time sort of experimenting with different ways of doing that. And I think I could have made my life easier. Which brings me on to my third point, is actually the support that's available. I've had great support in the department, and ideally we'd have a seamless transition through SRDS all the way through to promotional support. But I think that support is really important, and those conversations in terms of making life easier, but sort of steering you towards what's important. So I think accessing that support is really important. And that would be it for my 5 minutes. So thank you.
Is it straight on to me? So yeah, just mirroring what Aidan said, I suppose. So I'm a clinical academic, and I work across the Sheffield Children's Hospital and the University of Sheffield. And of course, I only came in to the university in 2021 through an MRC fellowship working on zebrafish models. And it was a bit of a hopping discipline, really, because as a clinician who hadn't done a lot of molecular or lab work even, having done it in my training days during my MD, it was a proper jump, and it was scary because I was suddenly putting myself out there, having been a consultant clinical geneticist, which is my specialty, jumping into lab work. So it was a bit of a steep learning curve, or a jump into the unknown, but I kind of embraced it, and as Aidan said, I kind of jumped into it headlong and started enjoying it. But it was tough. It was really tough, especially in the first couple of years, because it was juggling my clinical work, where I had a full-on clinical workload, having been for nearly 10 years as a full-time consultant with an NHS workload, and then trying to balance all the lab work as well. But I kind of stuck at it, and at the same time, I was conscious of the ACP framework, and one of the things that my head of department at the time said to me was, it doesn't matter what you do, it's what impact you generate from that work. And anything you do, you could sit in committees, you could turn up at meetings, I don't really care. It's about what you have done in that role. So that always stuck in the back of my head. I was like, yeah, I could turn up to Athena Swan or any meeting, but it's better for me to take a piece of work and lead on it and make a difference and show how that what difference that has created. And that's what I did leading up to the promotion. I always took on roles where I could make an impact. I could say that this is what I have done, own that piece. And also, it should be something that I particularly enjoy. I didn't want to just take on something and say, oh, I've ticked this box and I've generated some kind of impact. Along the way, I wanted to feel like I've enjoyed it as well. And one of the good things I also did was I took on the clinical director of research role at Sheffield Children's. And this was at a time when the relationship between the NHS Trust, the Children's, and the university could have been better, kind of thing. And this allowed me to really work on that piece and make more of that connections, make more of the relationship that existed. And this also led me to set up this South Yorkshire Children and Young People Health Research, the CIPHER initiative network. And that really allowed me to push some of the ACP criteria through, because it meant I was out there, with the professional understanding and engagement, but also with the academic citizenship, but also with the income generation. So it was one of those things that, you set up a lot of things along the way, and this was one that kind of ticked all the boxes, but also was something I particularly felt passionate about. So it's, picking up things that you really feel passionate about and can make a difference would be my thing.
Thank you. So just very briefly on my background and how I came to be here, but then to reiterate a lot of the points that Meena was saying, I entirely agree. So I am in history. I've been at the University of Sheffield since 2011. I came here as my first permanent job, so I worked my way up through the system. I was promoted to SL in 2017 and then to reader in 2019 in the old system. So this whole ACP framework was entirely new to me as I was applying for a professor. And it was a very steep learning curve and a lot of documents to go through, a lot of people to talk to, a lot of these kinds of training meetings to attend to figure out what does this all mean. And it's good that all of you in the room and all of you online are listening to this and presumably reading some of those documents, because there's a lot to figure out. So as I said, I'm a historian, so my sort of day job, the clinical stuff for me, is going to archives, writing books, writing articles. But in terms of the management and the administrative side of things, and what I tried to lead forward in my department was very much on the research front. So I've been director of research or deputy director of research, impact lead, those sorts of roles, and I tried, as Meena was saying, to take my own initiatives forward. And I supported colleagues in various research culture initiatives, starting with peer coaching schemes and helping them with that sort of thing. In addition, I was working on my own sort of historical version of clinical research and applying for grants and starting new projects, which was helpful to support my case, but it was the whole package that was quite important for my case. As a personal aside, and I know that we're all humans and we all have our own backgrounds that we bring to our cases. So I had almost 3 years of maternity leave and parental leave in that period between the readership and the application for professor, which meant that not only was I away from all sorts of things, but that when I was coming and going, it was a little bit difficult to piece together what I'd been doing and to tie that narrative together and help to support my case. But I was very conscious of what I was doing throughout and trying to think about, well, what do I want to lead on? What's important to me? So that in the end, when I was writing my promotion case, it was authentic and it was consistent. And I think, if you do what you want and it's meaningful to you and you're authentic about what you choose to do, that will come through. And I think that's quite important when we're applying. On the particulars of this, when you are applying, there are individual circumstances forms where you can talk about these kinds of things. And I encourage everybody, if that applies to you, to not ignore that form, because it will be read and will be considered. In terms of the process, as a historian who writes a lot and thinks a lot and critiques work of other colleagues and of myself, I would encourage colleagues working on their case to think about this like writing a journal article, where you draft it, it takes a while, you share it with other critical friends, possibly not even in your own department or school, but elsewhere, who will have a more objective eye about what looks good, what makes sense, what reads well, what can you speak to more clearly in the ACP guidelines, and to thematize that and make that really a red thread and a narrative throughout your case, where you actually refer back to the criteria and signpost it very clearly. And if you share your drafts with people early on, they'll be able to tell you this makes sense, that you haven't addressed this. What would be the worst thing to do, of course, would be to throw this together at the last minute. So take the time and find friends. It's a really stressful process, at least it was for me and for my colleagues who were going through it. So having friends to share this with is really helpful.
Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry, that was a bit loud. Forgot the mic was switched on. So I'm Sam Rigby. I'm a professor of blast protection engineering in the Faculty of Engineering, the School of Mechanical Aerospace and Civil Engineering. And yes, it still feels strange referring to myself as a professor. I'm still not used to it. I don't think I will be used to it for a long time. Yeah, I think a lot of what I was planning to say will kind of echo what was said previously, and then there are a couple of differences in sort of my case. But to kind of contextualize it, so I first came to this university in 2006 as an undergraduate. I did undergraduate, PhD, postdoc, lectureship, senior lectureship, and now professorship. And I was acutely aware of that from sort of the very first stages of my career. I had former heads of department saying, you need to break out of your supervisor's shadow, you need to establish yourself as an independent researcher. So I think, as much as it was hard to hear at the time, and as much as I probably wouldn't give that advice myself to early careers, I think it was it forced me into developing my own independent research and things that I was definitely leading and putting grants in as PI. And so I arrived at the stage where I was putting my case forward, where I had a good track record of things that I could say that I led on that. I've written these papers. I've been responsible for this grant capture. So I never found research as particularly difficult to achieve in terms of the promotion case. Sorry, that sounds really big-headed to say, but it was something that I consciously worked on from day one, I suppose. In terms of the most challenging aspects of the promotion case, it was always the leadership thing that I struggled with, and I think partly the way that I approached the role very early on was I was kind of like a magpie. I just took everything like, oh yeah, I want to do this, this sounds fun, this sounds cool. I think to echo some of the comments previously, that it meant that I was doing a lot, but not particularly achieving a lot. And I didn't have a huge amount that I could say, well, actually, yeah, that was me. It was more that I was in this task and finish group. I helped do this, I helped do that. So I think a number of years ago, I realized that actually I need to start having something that is mine from start to finish, that I can say, look, that's got my fingerprints on. And to echo what Aidan said, I became Director of Student Experience for Civil Engineering. I did 2 years of it. Before then, we moved to a school and somebody else took over. And a couple of comments were, well, 2 years as a director role, it's not really enough, enough time to evidence sustained achievement and this and that. But I thought, well, actually, everything that I've been doing in my admin and leadership roles up until this point has been sort of culminating in this. So Aidan mentioned about building it on a certain number of pillars. I built mine around 3 pillars. So when I was lecturer, I was outreach lead for the department. Then when I was senior lecturer, I became year 1 tutor, and then I became Director of Student Experience. So I basically told a story about how I built up these 3 main pillars to do with student experience, employability, and well-being, and I made sure that they were aligned with kind of the university goals and kind of general principles in that regard. And I think that really helped strengthen my case. So even though I only had the director bit and the NSS bit for 2 years, it made my leadership much more robust. So that's the bit that's similar to those who've gone before me. Something that's slightly different. I think I was always aware of the ACP. I think it was something that, for better or worse, was sort of beaten into me as an early career. So I was very used to evidencing what I had done with regards to the ACP. I think in particular, make SRDS work for you. So I used the SRDS rounds as kind of practice rounds to say, well, going through the ACP, my big wins this year were I brought in this grant, I wrote these papers that are ref 3.5 star, whatever. And that got me used to articulating it in a way that could then be articulated and lifted into the ACP. Yeah, so, and also in terms of writing the summary statements, writing the CV, if you're used to doing that year on year with the SRDS, it does become a little bit less daunting to do. But yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think the main comment I want to say is actually what's quite interesting is that everyone's paths are quite different. And I think probably a take-home message is that there's no one way of doing that. So my path's quite different again, I guess. So I was promoted last January 24 on a research-only track. So I came here in 2013 as one of the first round of Vice Chancellor's Fellows that the university had at that time. There are sort of 13 of us, and I think about 7 are professor now. So it was a very sort of successful round. So I then got an external fellowship from the Royal Society that funded me for 8 years, which finished just after my promotion. So I was actually promoted within the course of the fellowship, which meant that I couldn't do teaching and research because I was on a research-only contract. And there are various nuances about not being able to go for the teaching parts of the ACP that we can discuss later if anyone was interested. So I never really, I think, particularly planned the career and to go through the ACP, but I kind of, I guess, always took opportunities that arose as they came along. And I think going back to the sort of leadership things, I think what's really helpful is to kind of have a space that you have you specialize in some way. So rather than, as people said, spread yourself too thinly, actually where I did, because I was on a research-only contract, I wasn't really that involved in teaching. The department were quite good at sort of leaving me alone, mainly for that. I did a lot more work in supporting other fellows and academic mentorship and management and that. So I was originally the sort of departmental postdoc champion when we had those for a few years. And then I was asked to cover as one of the research theme leads on the school research exec when someone was on study leave originally. And then actually, what was probably the big thing that helped me get promoted was that I took on the role of one of the research cluster leads when the School of Biosciences formed. So I'm in Biosciences, by the way, so this is my sort of home turf. And I think that was a really interesting time because obviously, I mean, and the whole university is now going through this process, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really do a meaty role that has some impact. Because one of the really nice advantages of doing that was that everything's new. And so, you know, you need to show things that you've done, but actually you're setting up whole new processes because at the moment everything's being chucked up in the air and we're having to work how to merge departments and things. And so I think it's really helpful to be able to take on a new role or something that wasn't there before and that you can build it from the ground up because then everything is new and change and innovation, and that really helps the narrative. So I think there's lots of opportunities now at this particular time in the university to kind of show those sort of things, but it also really helps if you can focus in one area, because then you can build up this narrative and you can have a depth of multiple examples of things that you do in terms of management and things like that. So by the time, because I was one of the research cluster leads, I think at the time it was quite surprising because I think most people assumed at the time that all of the research clusters were going to be professors already, and I was the only one that wasn't. And that meant I was doing things that probably not many people were already doing. So I was already line managing 4 academics, for example, before I applied to be chair. And I don't think anybody in the department that wasn't a professor was already doing that. And I think what's really nice is sort of since then, actually, lots of other people have come through. So half of our cluster leads now are senior lecturers or junior lecturers, actually, even in one case. And so I think it's quite nice that these sort of fairly senior roles are actually accessible to people that are more junior, and actually they probably have more creative ideas and are more invested in the future of the university. And so I think it's a really good opportunity to put yourself forward. And I think at the time, you know, there was all these concerns about different departments merging, and I kind of wanted to support the people in the department and represent, you know, biomedical sciences in this kind of bigger school that we suddenly found ourselves in. And I think it was really, you know, quite scary, but I was strongly supported and encouraged by my line manager to kind of step up and try and do that. And I think it was a really, really good, positive experience. It was a lot of work, and, you know, whether I should have taken on a role that big when I was still on a fellowship is, you know, I guess a role. And, you know, that's one of my sort of main criticisms of the ACP is I think it works quite well for teaching and research staff. But if you're teaching only or research only, actually it's really difficult to have enough capacity to tick all those roles. And you know, I think actually, if you're in an external fellowship that funds 80% of your time, having enough spare capacity that you can meet the criteria of the ACP is very challenging indeed. And so I think there are larger things that we can do about that. But I think trying to take on roles that are high visibility, it definitely helps you. And so I think being selective about the sort of roles that you get asked to do or get taken on is actually a really good thing. And if you can create a narrative to bring things together into like one category where you can have multiple lines of evidence. So the other main thing I did that I think helped is that I was the first chair to setting up, we have this Fellows College thing in the School of Science, in the Faculty of Science, which was really good actually, because the idea was to support and bring fellows from across the faculty together. And that was Simon Foster's idea originally, but we were talking about it. And again, that was a new thing that was working at faculty level, but wasn't an enormous amount of work necessarily, but was able to have a real impact and demonstrate that, and then can build towards the more mentoring roles and things that I did that was a really strong part of my application in the end. And the final thing I want to say is one of the other advantages to being a cluster lead was that I also already sat on the school promotions panel as well for 2 years before I went through, including the panel that I was on, which is a little bit awkward. But the real sort of take home from that is that you get to see everyone else's applications and be on the panel that actually assesses everyone else's. And that was really a revelation, to kind of see what worked, what didn't work. And I think one of the nice things we've got in Biosciences is Sandra Lynn set up a kind of a list, well, a folder with people's applications on them, both successful and failed. There's some failed ones, Andrew, as well. And I think that's really helpful. Look at other people's applications and see what works and what doesn't work. And actually that process of sitting through and actually having to assess and rank other people's ones was very, very helpful when I had to do my own. And I can't sort of suggest reading other people's applications around, because there are definitely better and worse ways of putting yourself forward and building the narrative that you have to do. And that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. That's so wonderful to hear your experiences, and thank you for your candor as well. It's always nice to have a really honest view on the kind of pros and cons and difficult stuff and easy stuff about applying for promotion. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go for some questions and answers. I've realised I've given John and Cathy short shrift really and not properly introducing them, so I'll introduce them to you now. So we've got Professor John Flint and Professor Cathy Shrank down here. So between them, they've sat on an awful lot of promotions panels and have some really unique insight to offer there. So we'll go for our Q&A now. What I think we'll do is, should we ask for a couple of the pre-questions, Amy, if you want to field those. We ask a couple of them, and then we will go to our in-person and online audience.
Thank you. So, sorry. So the first question we've got is Maria Valmartin from the Faculty of Science, and that question was, can the panel provide key examples for leadership and impact?
Leadership in impact.
Leadership and impact.
And impact, it says.
I suppose I could go first. So we've all given lots of examples. And I think it's, for the leadership one, I would say it's, something that you feel you can own the piece and create some sort of impact from it, isn't it? And again, we've all given our own examples from our area of work. One of the things when it comes to the leadership is also looking outside of the university as well. So for example, I led on regional, national leadership roles, and it's evidencing that and how that ties in with what work you're doing at the university. I think if you can show that or demonstrate that, because previously I'd done all these roles and I felt very happy about them, but actually it's about what did you bring to the university? And again, that's where the SRDS is helpful, when they start to map it to the ACP and say, okay, what was the benefit? It was nice for you to go to all these European meetings, but what did you bring back to the university? What was the impact? And again, starting to think about that some more. And I think from my perspective also, in terms of impact, looking at the patient impact and what did that research help to, what was the story, how did I change management for a particular rare disease, because I work in a number of rare diseases. So it's not like diabetes or hypertension. I can't make huge impacts, but in a small way, how did I evidence it? So working with a number of patient support groups was quite helpful. Even if it was only a handful of patients, it showed that for that particular disease, it was very impactful. So, yeah.
It's interesting to hear the responses across the panel, and I think just taking leadership, it is taking things where you can put your fingerprints on it. It doesn't have to be a huge amount. If I had my time again, when I was research director, I'd have taken one or two things and driven them through, and they've got to be yours. I think that's where I had a problem. They've got to be yours. And they've got to be sort of lasting change. So you change the culture. And I would have been a lot sharper. I did too many things and didn't get the depth of impact. So it was interesting. I think we've had that experience of and I think the narrative of a progression of moving from one role to another. And I ended up with 2 or 3 things, and which I thought were not significant enough. I spent a lot of time trying to find more. And it's just they can be very targeted, very focused. And it's the narrative that sits behind it. Just on impact, I don't think I had a huge amount of impact. I didn't have that as one of my pillars. So I've had impact through my work, but it wasn't for me necessarily a major issue. So I think decoupling leadership and impact, depending on what your trajectory is, you don't need to tick every box in sort of to a great extent. So I've got impact. I could tick the box, but it wasn't a major thing for me, and I don't think it was an impediment or something I was hugely concerned about. Leadership was probably for all of us the fuzziness of the leadership, or trying to find something to ground it on.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add sort of my own perspective on it. So when I hear leadership and impact, maybe I interpret it slightly differently to mean, instead of impact, maybe sort of evidence, or something that you can use to quantify the effect of your leadership. And so my particular example, the one thing that happened that made me sort of ultimately convinced me to put myself forward for Prof was, I was so when I became director of student experience, I set my sights on improving the way that we did things in relation to the NSS, essentially, because from being year 1 tutor for a number of years, I'd seen the kind of, the way that we engage with the student voice, the way that we listen to feedback, the way that we changed our assessment policies. And I knew deep down that there were some things that needed improving, and I knew that the students were telling us that some things needed improving, but I never really had the leverage, the leadership, the position to do that. So when I became student experience lead, over summer, I had a look at our previous NSS scores. I poured through the free text comments. I recruited one of my PhD students to go through the assessments that we were giving our final year students, and said, go through these. Imagine that you're doing the NSS on each one of these, and tell me what's good about them, what's bad about them. And then I came up with an action plan that I put in place for final year modules to begin with, just as a little trial period. Seemed to work well. Then I rolled it out for the whole degree program. And the good thing about that, and again, the conversations that we've had already about targeting the things where you can make a clear narrative. I knew that the NSS results would be coming out, and I knew that we had previous NSS results. So I knew that I could, I literally put a graph in my promotion case that said NSS scores. I took over. Ooh, we went up. So that, and then in terms of the impact, I could say, well, we went from sort of hovering around kind of 10th place on various different things. We were down in 20th place for certain policies, and then by the time the kind of second round of my master plan had sounds very grandiose saying that, but that's what I called it. By the time the second round had gone through, we were up at sort of first and second place in most categories in the NSS, and then you could see that league table positions were starting to take an effect. So we climbed up in Guardian, Times Higher Education, Daily Mail as well, for what it's worth. So I could say on my case, well, actually, I had this strategy. I used my leadership to do X, Y, and Z, and the impact is this. And don't just take my word for it. Here are the league table positions. Here are the NSS scores year on year. So yeah, when I hear impact of leadership, to me that means just evidence what you've done. Maybe I was cynical and picked something where I knew that I could evidence it, but it all helped and contributed.
Can I just come in, because I didn't deal with impact in the same way. Just quickly, you can work back. I think I'd have done that, and I'd have worked out how I can demonstrate impact. If I'd have known the ACP, I've worked out how will I demonstrate what I do. I don't think that's a bad thing, because it means we achieve change. So, but I'd have done the same, and that's the strategic bit I didn't work out. Find something, and if it's independent and you can, so NSS scores go up, you bring in more fellowships or whatever it might be. It's a lot easier to make the case.
Yeah, I just add that because it's actually that quantifiable nature is really the problem, because it's demonstrating impact, and particularly if you not necessarily leadership in it, but the impact box of it, you need to show that you've made this much money, so many people have used your app, or and that's really important. And I think thinking about that when you start doing the thing is really the key, because you can't always go back and do questionnaires at the beginning, at the end. And I think faculty like numbers, and if you can draw a graph and say I made this graph go up, that is absolutely perfect. But you a bit of forward thinking of how you're going to measure what you're doing is probably really, really helpful.
Okay, so I'll pick a different one from a different faculty. So Colin Freeman from the Faculty of Engineering asked, how do you avoid it being all about research income?
Yeah, well, it isn't, I think. You probably have to tick it. I think if you don't have any research income, particularly in science and engineering, then you're going to struggle. But yeah, it isn't. You have to tick the other boxes too, unfortunately, no matter how much you've got.
Yeah, I mean, so the ACP, it is designed to, whilst recognising the challenges for research and teaching track, it is encouraging a really sort of broad range of the academic activities. You don't need to be doing everything all at the same time. You could be strategic about what you focus on at different points, but it's to make us sort of decent citizens. But it's not, it certainly is, you might bring all the research income in the world. You will fail at ACP if you're not doing the citizenship and the other things well in addition. And there is a perception that it's the research income that holds people back. but there are really good reasons to do the research income aside from, it allows you to do research you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. There's also actually, by applying for research grants, you're again being a decent citizen because you're providing potentially job opportunities for early careers, of which they are few and far between in many disciplines. You're also taking the burden off the research funds that are available to your sort of school, because you probably will get some research, sort of travel money, etc. So actually, just by getting the grant, you are being a good citizen and contributing to the research environment. So it's not this cynical, let's go and get sort of research income to get promoted. It's in our jobs, it's in our job expectations, it's something we're supposed to be doing for a number of different reasons.
Can I just add to that? So this is probably the most common myth. There are a couple of myths we'll talk about later on about research income. So I agree with everything Cathy said about its importance. It is actually not required to get promoted. So normally, I mean, it's harder for research-only colleagues, we'll come back to that, but you need to have two of the research criteria, one of which must be high quality outputs, which is core. If you have strong impact in the sense of non-academic impact, you don't actually require the research income box. So not only is it the only thing that we're interested in, it's not actually compulsory to get promoted. Obviously, we want people to have it for the reasons that Cathy's said and Jason said, but it is not actually a technical requirement of promotion. In the sense of reductions or expectations for something. Do you go, Cathy?
So also, sort of, although that's the norm, that as someone with research in the contract, you would need either, as well as the core research outputs, research income or research impact, or both. You can, if there are particular circumstances, for example, if you've been, doing a major leadership role during a time of change, you can apply to be considered through alternative criteria, where you would drop those extra research categories and bring in something from somewhere else, whether that's curriculum enhancement, or the change, so there are circumstances, unusual, but there are examples of people being assessed without those additional categories.
Okay, so one from Emma Blakey in the Faculty of Science. How should sustained be understood?
How should it be sustained? Yeah. Thanks. I think this in a way goes back to the discussion that John and Cathy were talking about regarding citizenship, right? So being a good citizen. So if you parachute in 1 year and you do some amazing thing, and the rest of the time you're just sitting back on vacation or holiday in the UK context, that doesn't look terribly good, does it? So I think sustained means that you're consistently engaged in these different parts of your job. You're not just suddenly getting, the major grant, and the rest of the time you never show up to any meetings. It's that you're part of the community of your school, of your cluster, of your department. You're working consistently with colleagues, with PGR students, etc., and you're participating fully as a member of the university. To me, that's what sustained means. And obviously, there are the other things like the graphs and the statistics, which help our cases, and the sustenance of what we do will be shown in those graphs. But I think it's about the overall narrative of how we contribute. I don't know, does anybody else have anything to say on sustained?
Right, so what we'll do then is we'll go to some questions from the room. So if we have a couple of questions, if there's any in the room, and then we'll go to online. Anna, you were going to be our roving mic, weren't you? You'll move around if there's anyone there.
Then I can always bring it back.
So if anyone's got any questions.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Katharina. I'm from the Faculty of Health. I've actually been recently promoted to grade 9, so I am, not quite there yet, but I'm learning. One thing that I hear a lot is taking on these leadership positions. You've identified a few. Some of them you made your own, which is great. but there are some, I hear a lot of director of this, director of that, da, 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 da. As a research only, on a research only contract, I am a research fellow, and as Jason highlighted, if you are a research only fellow, 80% of your time is dedicated to your research by contract with your funders. That means that a lot of these positions that are great, are out there, are not accessible to us by definition, because the time allocation required to fulfill those positions are above what I can dedicate by contract. So how is the university going to deal with this? Because if this does not change, then people who are on research-only contracts, for a reason, you know, we have very competitive, high-regarded fellowships providing a lot of research money for the university. How can we attain these positions? You know, how can we achieve them? How can we access them? It's not even possible to apply to them at the moment.
So leadership, you don't need to have a role or a title like director to be showing leadership. And certainly in terms of the individual circumstances, I've seen applications that state as part of the individual circumstances they've been on a particular contract, or you know, had career breaks through sort of you know, sort of family circumstances, etc., and therefore asked for consideration to be taken in the category of leadership, for example. But you can show lots and lots of leadership and, you know, affect change, sort of positive stuff without having the title of director. It's sort of taking advantage of the opportunities and sort of showing a bit of initiative. You see a problem and then you come up with a solution to it. And there are lots of the leadership roles below the level of director that are workloaded at way less. You know, sort of, there are kind of 20% ones, 15% ones as well, the official roles.
So if I can add to that, I think that's the point. You don't have to take up one of those big roles. And I wanted to be promoted on a TNR, and as I was saying initially, it was an MRC fellowship, which was that exactly what you've described, Katrina. But I think what I then went for is an impact lead, which wasn't as like a director role, not that much WAF and things, but it did mean that I could go to those impactful meetings and, make a difference and contribute to REF. And then when it came to the teaching role, again, I went to Jenny Walsh and said, I want something on the teaching, but I don't have the time. I know I can't deliver on a big face leadership or anything like that, or module lead, or what would be available. And she gave me a suggested role where they were looking for something. And I took that on. It was a medical careers education lead for the MBCHP course. And that was something I also felt passionate about, because I want to see all the medical students coming to pediatrics if possible and all that. So again, taking on something like that, which wasn't as time consuming, if I may say that, but at the same time had impact. So it's trying to choose something that fits into that box, but doesn't have to be a big role.
So, I'm sorry.
Oh, so yeah, I was just very quickly. I was just going to say a friend of mine who went through her promotion at the same time. She was PI on a centre, like an academic centre, and she was the lead of that. So it was Sheffield and a few other universities, and that became a big part of her leadership in her case, because she was saying, well, I am the lead of this centre. So granted, that's not that's sort of the top range of what might be expected, but the point is that there's likely leadership potential in roles that you can still enact as part of your research role, and I think just be tuned in with what they might be, because there is space for them on the ACP. I think we've had leadership roles that are outside of our research, but that's not necessarily how it has to be.
Just on that, to go back to the bit about advice, I think it's where we link up SRDS and advice. So that should be a discussion you should be having as part of SRDS and as part of discussion with line manager. And if you're not, it'd be worth having that discussion. So again, if you look at probation, if you're mentoring somebody on probation, they have to demonstrate leadership as part of probation. And it's a similar issue. And it means that if you're aligned from the very start with the ACP, it's a bit more seamless than it is for a lot of us who who were then overtaken by this process and hadn't been through that process. So I think it's a really good discussion to have. What does it look like for you? How can you identify something? And just on the big roles, I would avoid them. You know, I did them, and I did them too early, and I ended up scattergunning in those roles because, and I don't think a big role is necessarily the way forward. I think it's really interesting, this progression of doing something like a role that expands your teaching student experience, and then building on that. So it doesn't have to be a big role either. I know we've done those things. If I look back, I would have probably resisted doing some of those things and done something a bit smaller, a bit more strategic, which it didn't take. I think, Julie, you were talking about the time it takes. There's a relationship between the time it takes to do a big role and the return you get back on it, which I think is something for us all to think about, sort of at different stages.
Oh, I just wanted to, can I add to that as well? Because my question was, well, my issue was exactly the same as your point. So I'm a G9. I actually applied for promotion last year and failed at the faculty level because of I've forgotten the word, leadership. And that was the reason I resisted applying for a long time, because I thought I don't have a leadership role, you know. And I had a lot of kind of small leadership things that I tried to push through, and it got rejected. So I then sat down with my head of school and my line manager and the director of research, and we kind of looked at some options of what I could do that would help me to promote that. So we looked at whether there could be one of the standard roles, because typically researchers don't get assigned, you know, these department roles or school roles, as they're now called. They're not, because we don't have the, you know, and also we don't have the time, because, you know, if we're 100% on research. So they decided exceptionally to, you know, to look at what might fit. And we talked for ages, and I looked through, you know, all possible options. And we talked about even, you know, trying to create a new role and what that might be. So eventually I've been assigned school impact lead. So we're going to see how that comes off and whether it will be enough. But also, I never thought at the time, so I do a lot of research on big European projects, and I have done for years, including, you know, leading substantial parts of those projects. And I never thought about external leadership as being eligible. But I think in hindsight, possibly I could have used that to my advantage. I don't know if that's that's the case, but certainly I'll think about that next time around. But
absolutely, I think so. When I applied, I had a lot of external leadership roles, very few internal leadership roles. But it's evidencing those external leadership roles and what did it bring to the university, which I don't know, Cathy and John might contradict me, but I think that was helpful to say that, yes, I had these couple of important roles within the university, but there were all these 6 other roles that I was doing, regional, national, international, which has helped the university shine a spotlight on the work we're doing. And so that was helpful, I think.
Yeah, it feels a bit nebulous as to how that directly, you know, impacts the university. You know, for example, on if you've got leadership roles on big projects, but I don't know how to evidence that.
So I can give you one example. So I was the director of Northeast Yorkshire Genomic Medicine Service Research Collaborative, and that meant in that role I was able to set up a regional network between the universities, University of Sheffield, Leeds, Bradford, and, you know, try and bring genomics research into the universities and run some workshops and things. So that was something I could easily evidence, as this was something I brought in through that leadership role. And again, this is some advice I was given. You know, you could put it in different areas, isn't it? But you just map it out and say, okay, this is an area where this could have gone under academic citizenship or on a professional engagement. And it's trying to map which are your weak areas, I suppose, and how do you map it to that? Because the narrative could be changed according to where it fits within the ACP criteria.
Right, thanks everyone. I think we might put a pin in that one for now and see if we can direct some questions from online.
Okay. I could just see that John was about to come back quickly on that, and then if we go, so is that okay?
Sorry, Amy, but just very quickly, the point about being nebulous, we need to remember, we're talking about leadership generically, there are 2 pillars, high quality management and change enhancement. And if you think I've got to demonstrate the ability to do high quality management, that brings everything we've talked about into play. And it's the same with change and enhancement. So yes, it should have a benefit to the university in the way that Meena said, but it's much more, it's broader. So think about high quality management and change enhancement specifically, and everything we've talked about is eligible. If we just think about leadership as something that directly benefits the university, that's much more narrow, but that's not actually what you're being asked to evidence.
Right. It doesn't have to directly benefit the university.
No, I think you would need to say it would benefit the university in broader terms, but no, it doesn't have to be a leadership role. Absolutely not. No.
Yeah, so just a few things from online. So Emma Blakey's question earlier, asking how should sustained be understood. She just wanted to clarify. She said, by sustained, I mean, how do you know when you have sustained enough evidence to go forward? Many of the criteria require a sustained impact in terms of impact or even high quality management. So I don't know if that changes anyone's answer.
I think the main thing I would say is you go when you go, and you see what happens. Otherwise, you could be waiting forever and thinking, am I ready for it? I think it's also a case of putting yourself out there, and if you get shot, so be it. You learn from the process and you think, right, let's go again.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's sustained, I guess, is the point where you can evidence that you've had an impact, really. So if you have to wait until you can see it, because sometimes impact can take a long time. And I would say, yeah, what Meena said is that actually certainly in our biosciences process, there's a very early stage where you can put in a sort of lightweight application and be told whether it's worth committing to doing the whole thing, because obviously the whole documentation is quite a lot of effort. And so, yeah, there's no harm in asking, is this good enough, and getting feedback from the school. I think that's definitely, don't be upset about being rejected, because actually there are processes to kind of tell you at early-ish stages, whether it's worth going now or whether you need to work on an area, get some feedback.
Thank you. And then we've got Emily Wood said, for grant capture, the requirement is to bring in grants above the norm for your discipline. How do you find out what the norm is for your discipline? And later on in the chat, someone has said that your director of research should probably know that, but then we have another opinion saying not necessarily. So has anyone got any thoughts on that?
Certainly in Arts and Humanities, we get supplied with a set of statistics that have been provided by RPI. But what's important there is not absolute numbers, that's a guide. It's the sort of the narrative around sort of your kind of grant behaviour is really crucial. And also it is done by school, the statistics. You are on panels where people are aware, even within a subject area, there are variations within disciplines. And so that is also something that is part of the discussion.
Cathy's absolutely right. The genesis of the number, and they are provided to every faculty and school, it's based on Russell Group benchmark. So that's the starting point for figure. But as Cathy says, there's lots of nuance around particular sub-disciplines where it's more difficult to get funding, or the norms are. So it is a guide, but it's based on the Russell Group.
Okay, thank you. And the next question online is from Jose Casamayo Alarco, and he says, do promotion panels consider disciplinary differences in terms of research income and publications and the outlets where these publications are published? I feel that panels may not be familiar with the particularities of the field if they are not from that field.
So if I may go first, so a couple of things on that. I mean, I'll say something later about the importance of writing in a way that's understandable to panel members who aren't in your discipline, because I think that's really important. But we follow the same processes as the ref would, in the sense that it's not all about the particular journal or the prestige. It's really challenging because each individual indicator of esteem for the the quality of your output is individually problematic. So using ref scores is problematic. Using citations is problematic. Using impact factors is problematic. So really, what I think you want to try to do is focus on the intellectual contribution that the paper has made. I think this is where the head of department statement really helps, because you can't always evidence that yourself. The head of department needs to verify that it's a high quality contribution, and it's probably a mixture of things like ref scores, the prestige of the journal, etc. That's probably the way to try to evidence that. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Peer review can be another way, so a peer-reviewed journal is always better than a not peer-reviewed. You can use the peer review comments from the anonymous review judiciously. If it's a published work that's had a published review, you can use those. So it's a range of things to show the quality, because that's the really important thing in the outputs is its quality is really crucial. That the actual quantity that we're asked to produce is quite humane, and it's but it's sort of evidencing the quality through a range of measures.
Sorry, can I just add one more thing to that as well? So there was a big push when I promoted. There was a big push from the Faculty of Engineering to make sure that high quality research outputs was sort of properly properly and rigorously assessed. And there was a bit of back and forth between me and the school and faculty directors of research about how to articulate that properly in the 250-word statement and beyond. So don't forget that you can selectively use appendices as part of your CV. So what I did was I thought there's no way in 250 words I can't talk about the quality of my research outputs and give all that nuance. So I wrote a brief I can't remember what I called it, a research excellence narrative, where I talked about some of the ref reviews that I'd got, not exclusively using that as a benchmark, but just adding that as a bit of context. I also reached out to some experts in my field, and I said, I know that you're aware of my work, I know that you cited this paper, would you mind just writing a brief comment on its significance, its novelty, its rigor, the sorts of things that the ref is assessing for. And then I put those in as kind of letters of support for my prof case. And so I had the research narrative that kind of summarized what they said and how I had led on various aspects of it, and then those letters of support. So that was, to me, that was enough so that the 250 words I could just focus on, these have been deemed to be internationally recognized and that sort of thing. So I think just general advice, if there are any areas that you feel are particularly either weaker or more difficult to articulate than 250 words, make use of the appendices of your CV.
I like that idea, Sam, going and asking people to write reviews. That's a really good idea. Right, so I think I've got time for one more question in the room, and then we go on to our next little speeches. Any other questions in the room before we go forward? If not, we'll go online. Is there one? Okay.
No, take the microphone. The person.
No.
Okay. Hey, thanks very much. I'm Mike Taylor. I work in the Faculty of Social Sciences. I have a slightly more base question than has maybe been asked already, because so I don't work in a part of the university where there is a significant bank of previous successful P1 applications, so I'm slightly flying blind. And some of these descriptions that you just presented of things that might go in there are not things that had occurred to me. None of these are written down anywhere. I've got a neurodivergent condition. You can use your imagination. And I made the mistake of following the instructions. But one thing that I'd find really helpful would just be to get some numbers of how long did this take you? How long was it?
Sorry, how long did it take you to prepare the application, or to?
Yeah, and then how many pages you end up with?
Well, I guess that's quite very discipline specific. But what I would say is there may not be like a bank, but actually, if you ask people are normally really happy to share their grants and promotion things, and even the unsuccessful ones, which are often helpful to see. So I would definitely encourage you to go and see ones. And actually, the P1 application is exactly the same as the senior lecturer and one. So they don't even have to necessarily be prof ones if you want to have some idea on the best way to format it and lay it out and try and present yourself in the best possible way. So I would definitely say just ask people that have been promoted to have a look, because people are generally really happy to share.
The other thing I would also add is there is a document which certainly in the Faculty of Health we were sent around, which was what is the difference between a grade 9 or a senior clinical lecturer in my case and the P1. And it's great to sort of compare and contrast that. And it's very clear where you should show that evidence. Like for high quality outputs, it was at least 2, 3-star, 4-star papers. And yeah, you can have 150 papers, but if you've got 2 that are 3 or 4-star, that's enough. And so it's finding out those differences and mapping that exactly in the summary, because you haven't got much words to play with. So that document I thought was super helpful.
Yeah, and then just in terms of pure numbers, my CV plus appendices was about 70 pages in total, but a big, I can hear the groans, a big component of it was just the kind of formulaic stuff, you know, list of grants, PhD students supervised. I think the biggest chunk was the publications. The publications can be, there's a tool on My Publications where you can download a formatted list. I kept my SLCV up to date. So whenever I published a new paper, I put it in. I had a separate document that was just kind of a scratch pad where I would, you know, if I had an invited lecture, I'd put it in. If I attended this workshop or whatever. So the total number of hours spent on my CV, it's quite difficult to put a number to. But in terms of when I actually committed and said, right, I'm going to go for it, it might only have just been, you know, a couple of afternoons over the space of a week, because I already had the pragmatic stuff done, because I was doing that, you know, sort of monthly as just to keep up to date. And then the stuff surrounding the narrative, I already had it in bullet point form, because that was informed by my SRDS, my meetings with mentors. So it wasn't a huge investment in time. Like it was an investment in time, but it depends really, I guess.
Yeah, I would say mine was a lot more. I would say I spent 2 to 3 weeks probably worth of time. One thing I think is keeping it up to date. I didn't keep my CV, and we used to in the department require people to do CVs every year, which was so I regret not. So my advice is keep it up to date, but also start writing the narrative. Don't just do the CV, and it'd be really helpful. So this is the loop for me, because the ACP sort of wasn't there when I was in place. So all that thing of evidencing, writing the narrative, if you start doing it now, it will be so much easier, but it will shape your practice. And it's my point that the ACP does I think it makes us sharper academics. And that was my conclusion at the end of the process. I was a sharper academic having gone through it. But if you're doing it a way along, you'll make different decisions, and you'll potentially make your life a lot easier in terms of decisions around admin roles, how much time to put into things that don't pay off. We've all got a tendency, or I have, to procrastinate by being able to fill up time doing an admin role that doesn't necessarily, is not as sharp as it could be. But I think get that CV done. You only need to see one application to get a feel for what's in there and write your own narrative, but start writing the narrative as well. And I think this is a really good example of you've got it in place. It doesn't, I would say mine was 3 weeks of fairly solid work, mainly over the summer when I should have been having some holiday, but that's because I didn't keep on top of it. So I don't think you need to do it that way, but I would do it, and I would just not do the CV. And have a go at the 250 words and how you link the CV to that. Do all of that.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think we're going to go on to our reflections from our faculty promotions panel. So with John and Cathy. Does one of you want to stand up first, or do you want to both stand up at the podium, or?
Okay, well, firstly, thanks for inviting us to this session and arranging it, and thanks for, I think, really interesting insights and advice from panel colleagues. So I want to start off, I said earlier on about, you know, some of the narratives you hear about the promotion process. So in our experience, and I think Cathy and I, between us, have been on faculty promotion panels in 4 of the 5 faculties in the university. Faculty panels do aim and want to promote colleagues who meet the criteria. think there's sometimes a sense that faculty panels go out their way to find a reason not to promote somebody. That's not the case. Some of the other things that we hear are, that there are quotas for promotion each year by school or by grade. That's not true, and also that promotion is linked to the financial position of a school. Just to reassure you again that is not true. And I think, as we've already discussed this afternoon, it is also not the case that one criteria, particularly research income, is treated more importantly than the others. So turning on to some advice, and I think some of this has been covered already. I think the starting point is to have a go at producing the summary statement. If you do that first, I think that gives you an indication of where you're at before you move to, say, filling out your CV. I think it's really important that you remember you need to meet the requirements of all 6 criteria. So exceptional performance in one will not compensate for being under the bar on the other. And I think that, again, it's really important about. Therefore, you need to work out which of the optional criteria you're going to use. That is much more constrained for research-only colleagues and teaching-only colleagues, actually, than it is for T&R colleagues. But I think you need to have a go sometimes that, if you get down to it, right, I need to pick 2 from 3 potential optional criteria. Again, have a go at the summary statement, work out which are probably the stronger ones, and that will guide you. And I think another thing I would just say is you've got to be honest with yourselves about where the weaknesses are. I think there's just a human temptation sometimes to keep racking up the stuff you're really good at and you're comfortable with, and really what you've got to do is focus on the areas where you need opportunity, you need support from others to achieve that. We've mentioned already, I think both Jason and Julia mentioned about getting colleagues to comment on drafts. That's just critically important. I would say that in the pool of people who look at a draft, I think it is really important you've got at least one person, maybe 2, who have actually been on the faculty promotion panel itself, because I think that does make a difference. Look at examples we've already discussed. Something that I think we touched on as well, I think it's, again, crucial to understand most members of the panel, over 90% of the panel, are not from your discipline. They're not experts in the discipline. They don't know the specifics of the discipline or your school, and they don't know you. And that's really important, because the way that panels do the scoring and the way this works is panel members get the application packs. They score them in isolation, individually, without any discussion with anybody else. Those scores do shape the discussion at the faculty panel. So my advice is always write your application in a way that if you think about the discipline in your faculty that's furthest away from your own, think about the head of that school and think, will they understand this case? Because things like using abbreviations, talking about societies, whatever, right? Is that understandable to somebody a long way away? And I say it does matter, because the scores are done in isolation without clarification, and that does shape the wider promotion panel. This is an obvious point. Ensure clarity, relate back to the criteria. Obviously, that's great. This is what the criteria says. This is how I meet it. Information that is confusing or complex is unlikely to be regarded positively. So, for example, in grants, just set out very clearly what the grants you've had, PI, CI, etc. And then just finally, before I hand over to Cathy, just a couple of points on individual criteria. So for impact, the focus should be on outcomes, not processes. That sounds obvious, but it's a really common weakness that people describe all the processes they've done around non-academic impact. The focus needs to be on what impact has been achieved. For high quality management and change and enhancement, and I think a number of colleagues have set this out really well, it needs to be in the approach you took and the outcome, not just explaining the role that you had. That's, again, another common weakness, I think. And then finally, for academic citizenship, the focus really needs to be on the things that you didn't necessarily need to do. And I think the strongest academic citizenship statements tend to include phrases like, I volunteered, I stepped up, I covered, I initiated something. It's not just saying, well, I go to staff meetings, etc., etc. So just some observations for myself. I'll stop there, and Cathy, I'll hand over to yourself.
Thanks. So I'm going to say endorse everything that John said. Okay, so picking up on some of the things that have been said earlier, so I do think it's a really, really good idea to start early, actually, as in years before you're intending to go for promotion, that the ACP actually isn't just about promotion, it's actually a guide to what we should be doing in our jobs at that grade already. So make sure you're thoroughly acquainted with the ACP early on. You can go to briefing sessions. There's really helpful guidance on the web pages, including the document that was referred to earlier, where it sets out sort of it's called the criteria comparison, and it's on the HR web pages, and it highlights in yellow what the changes are between the different grades, and that can tell you sort of, you know, whether you are actually stepping up, because you get promoted once you can show that you've stepped up into the grade above in 6 of the categories, including the 4 core ones that you have to be hitting on a TNR or 3 on the other tracks. So yes, so sort of look at it early, talk things through with your line manager or mentor and so on, and do that mapping of what you've got in each of the boxes. And just, you know, it's already been said, sometimes there are things that can go into different boxes. So sort of, you know, choose the, you know, so that you can be strategic. You mustn't repeat yourself. You can't double bank, but you can actually be strategic about telling a story within those different boxes. And it's really helpful to have someone else's eyes on that. You know, we're not always good for seeing the wood for the trees when it comes to ourselves. So yes, do that kind of consulting with other people. I think it's really crucial to follow the instructions, that don't go over the word count. You know, the people on these panels have an awful lot of paperwork to read. They will not thank you for kind of putting 500 words when there's 250 words as, you know, the max. And it's also a matter of equity. You know, you can show your brilliance in 500 words, but if, you know, the other people who followed the rules and done it in 250, you know, it's about equity, and it's about being kind to the people on the panel. And yeah, make sure you're addressing those ACP criteria, sort of speak the language back to it. And the high quality management section needs particular care, if you've chosen that one, that it's the only one of the criteria where you have to demonstrate all of the kind of sort of things that it says. It's the only one where you need to do that. So make sure that you talk about each of those things in the language that it uses. And there is one that I get really het up about every year when it talks about entrepreneurial ambition. For me, from the arts and humanities, that is quite alien to what I'm thinking as academic. So I kind of reread that as showing initiative. You've seen a problem and you've done something about it, rather, you know. So for example, you know, the example from engineering I think would have been a really good example about entrepreneurial ambition. I do wish they'd changed the language, but that's what we are where we are with it. So yes, John highlighted the way in which the panel won't comprise experts from your discipline or subdiscipline, but you should also be encouraged and reassured that the people on that panel know that they're not from your discipline or subdiscipline, and they are wanting to hear from people who are closer to it. So those scores are the starting point for the discussion, but people do change their mind when they're having the discussion with people who know stuff. Okay, I've said the stuff about the lot of paperwork. Yes, so be kind to them. Don't make them hunt for information. Basically, sort of the summary statement needs to make the case. The CV then provides additional, more detailed evidence, but they are not going to be looking at the CV to make the case for you. You need to make the case in that summary statement. It's always what I look at first, and then the head's letter of support, and then the CV to kind of do the kind of cross-checking and backing up. Check your application really carefully before you submit it. So it is a lengthy process putting together the application process. There's a number of stages. So departments will have a 2-stage process that happens late spring, early summer. There's the faculty process in sort of normally September-ish, and then sort of well, that's where the deadline, you know, so yeah, so you'd be submitting about September usually. And a lot can change between, you know, you putting together your paperwork before the first department panel and when it goes to, you know, the faculty. So just make sure that if you know, something, you know, a publication comes out, that it's all accurate and updated, and if someone's cross-checking, it's really sort of clear that, because it starts to ask questions if it says, the summary statement says 3 publications and there's only 2 on the CV, that kind of thing. There's probably a valid reason for that. You didn't update the CV, but you don't want them to be putting questions in their minds. Okay, and make sure it's well presented as well. I have seen CVs in horrible, horrible fonts. Don't do that to us. Okay, and yes, just to sort of, Julia was sort of talking about individual circumstances. If those do apply to you, then use that form. It's taken really, really seriously by faculty panels. It's not unusual in arts humanities for 50% of our cases to have individual circumstances and be supported. It's a really, really important part of the process. And there is a slightly different way of doing that now, where it used to be that the entire panel would see what the individual circumstances are. Now there's an earlier stage where it's a much smaller group, so it'll be I think in most faculties it's HR, faculty director on the university, head of faculty, see what the individual circumstances are, and then make a recommendation back to the school what the adjustments should be, and that the circumstances remain private. But yes, use that if it applies to you. I think that's all.
Brilliant. Thanks, John, and thanks, Cathy. Right, so question time again. Should we start in the room? Have we got any questions in the room?
Hi, my name is Carolina Scarton. I'm from the School of Computer Science. I think I have some maybe provocation, maybe not a question, I'm not sure. So the first one, we heard from our colleagues on the research-only track and how time to invest on some activities is not on the remit. But I also feel that as an academic, we don't have time to do everything that the ACP actually asks. So I would like to hear from the panel whether you kept a good work-life balance, or whether getting promoted that actually took a really toll on your life. The other thing that I found interesting was the mention that we need to be strategic on the kind of admin activity that we do, and that sometimes is not something that we can choose. And also that sometimes means that there is a lot of admin activity that needs to be done, and the university tells us that it's important, but it's not ACP material. And I'd like to, maybe you can discuss that. And sorry, it's the 3-part question. And maybe finally for John and Cathy, maybe you don't know the answer for that, but I do feel that there is sometimes an imbalance of some people that get promoted through other routes, like, for example, get a job somewhere else and then get a counter offer from the university, versus people that are here and try sometimes to go to the ACP, and maybe there is no way of comparing the people that are should be on the same level. And I think that is an important point on equity and equality that we don't take into account, or if we do, I'd like to hear more about it.
Maybe if we answer that last question first, does that make sense? And then we'll go to the panel for the other ones.
So I think you're right. I mean, there's a common perception, and there might be some truth in it, that it's harder to get promoted internally than it is to get appointed to a new institution. I mean, theoretically, that shouldn't happen, of course, because if we've been rigorous in our recruitment process, if we're recruiting a Band 1 prof, they should be working at Band 1, which is the same expectation of an internal applicant. But I'm not saying that disparity doesn't exist, because there's also the interview part, isn't it? And sometimes people knowing what you're like is a huge advantage. Sometimes it's not necessarily so. You get people who present a very, very coherent account of what they've done at other institutions, and that doesn't always come to pass. So it does occur. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it shouldn't theoretically, because it's the same argument. And what was the second? There was a second part to it as well, wasn't there?
The retention case.
Retention cases.
Yeah.
So I think we probably still have differential practice across the university. If I'm honest, in my own faculty, we absolutely stopped doing retention cases. But promotion is the one round, And you know, that is not right, that somebody who doesn't meet the criteria threatens to leave and therefore are allowed to get promoted. I don't know, honestly, the HR process across the entire institution, but certainly my own faculty, I think we very much stopped doing that, and I think that was beneficial actually to faculty in the long run.
So I'll answer, or I'll offer my thoughts on your other two questions. So I think to a certain extent they're kind of linked, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But so second question was about the admin roles and, you know, the advice about being smart in terms of what can contribute to ACP. And then the first one was about work-life balance. Okay. So with my, I mentioned right at the start about how my approach was quite like a magpie. When I first started, I was like, oh yeah, I want to do that. I think if I was to spend my time over again, I still probably would do that, because not only did that make me more sort of in tune with where the opportunities were, but I think also the way that I eventually learned to put that into a promotion case, it meant that there were certain things that in their own right might not have been ACP-able, but they contributed to a bigger picture. They contributed to my aptitude in a particular area. They contributed to my standing within the department and the school as the person who's involved with this. So I printed off my summary statement in advance, and I was just looking at my academic citizenship. And the way that I grouped it was I grouped it into 4 main categories. So mentorship, contribution to department/faculty, sharing of research and scholarly activity, and then collegiality and contribution to wider university activities. So looking at each individual bullet point, some of them might seem a bit inconsequential, but then when it's told as if, well, actually, this is my attempt to put myself as the person who is, I mean, Jason mentioned mentorship as well. So yeah, does that make a little bit more sense? So the reason why that relates to work-life balance is, I think there is, if you were to look at this, my statement, you look at it and go, when did you sleep? But this is just me being clever with what I decided to group together, and how I picked those themes out of what I was doing, and the things that ultimately, the things that I said yes to because they sounded fun and because I wanted to do them, wanted to get involved in them. And I think just sort of in terms of work-life balance, so since being promoted to SL, I had 2 kids, so I've got a 5-year-old and she's going to be 3 on Monday. Happy birthday, Jessica. After each of my children were born, I said, I'm not doing any international travel for a year. I don't want to be away from them for any nights during that time. I massively cut down the amount of weekends I worked because of worked on open days. I leave work early on a Friday to pick Isaac up from school. So I think I managed to maintain quite a healthy work-life balance. And I think, yeah, and I think it's because I recognise that you can be strategic in how you. I think it's like what Aidan said about how the ACP should make you a sharper academic. I think it really helped me learn what the important aspects of my job are, and it's not. It's the groupings, I think, and it's the themes, and it's what you contribute to in a sort of holistic sense, rather than just I was the lead of this task and finish group and we did this. Does that make a bit more sense? Cool.
I just want to add that I think people need to not be afraid of saying no to taking things on as well also, and I think there's, I think workloads have undoubtedly increased enormously over the last sort of 5 years at university, so time is a pressure, and I think there is a need to be strategic and, as I say, try and take roles that are aligned into a nice narrative, but we can be more efficient in how we spread those tasks out over a department, and maybe someone will ask you to do something because you're the kind of person that's friendly and always says no, always says yes to things, right? And I think there's a lot of that, and I think that leads into a lot of the inequalities that we see across everything else. And if you're the kind of nice collegiate person that says yes to everything, you may well end up in a situation where you don't have a nice kind of organised kind of thing. So, but that may actually not be the best opportunity for you. It might be a better opportunity for somebody else who needs that for their ACP, or more aligned to somebody else's narrative and things. So I wouldn't feel bad. So you shouldn't necessarily feel bad for saying no. Maybe you should have a discussion and say, actually, I'm more interested in working in this area and taking on something else. I mean, it's not that we're not doing anything, right? It's not that you haven't got your time filled with productive and useful things. So I think if you can be strategic and try and build the things that are most useful to you, if everybody did that, I think we could probably spread the work out in a way that everybody benefits better. And just because you're the first person that someone's knocked on the door to ask to do it, doesn't mean that actually you're the right person, and you shouldn't feel bad for saying no. And I think this is where mentorship and things really come in helpful. And there are things like this thing we're at today, where we're trying to support people in that. But I think a lot of that at the moment is probably too focused on junior academics. I think there's definitely a gap where people at this career stage struggle to have adequate mentorship. And so just having somebody that you can have a coffee and think, should I do this or not? You can ask other people's opinion before you commit to something. And if that doesn't align with what's best for you, that's not a bad thing. It's not that you're sitting there being a terrible citizen. So don't feel bad. And I think be a bit more strategic and selective in what you do. And you might find that you can get that balance a little bit better.
I think your point is a good one. I don't think we always have the choice, and I think that's and we always got to remember that the one thing we haven't talked about here is the head of department, head of school statement. So being selfish and turning things down is not probably a good thing either. And I think for me, that head of school statement and talking through what that might look like was useful. I've done lots of different roles, and he said, well, I'll make the case that you've done I'll explain that you've done lots of different roles. That's reflected in your CV, and it looks slightly different. I think it's about being strategic, and I think when we take on admin roles, there's a lot of noise and expectation, and it's about trying to bend that role to make it do what you want to do, and that's the bit I think we could do with a conversation. With sometimes you've taken on that role. Somebody who's done it before, what does that look like in terms of being able to tick your box of demonstrating the ability to lead something? And I think that would be, that I think is where I'm sharper as a result of doing this. And my advice to other people is sharper. Make that role work for you, work out what the noise is. And I think there is, I do think we can take on a lot of the noise around us. And if we're sharper, it helps us to make that decision. What's the noise that we can deal with it easily and quickly? How do we get advice on that? Make sure we're doing the right thing. And how do we then spend the time on things that matter? So I really think if I'd have done it again, I'd have probably worked better, had a better work-life balance, and I'd have ticked the box better, and I'd have asked a bit more advice from people about how I do that. So I do think we can work better on that, and I think we don't always get the choice as to what we do, but we should be looking for ways of making it work for us. And it's not easy, I know it's not easy, but I think if we approach it like that, we make our lives a lot better. And I think this work-life balance thing, and I feel I've got a better work-life balance because I'm making different strategic decisions.
One final thing to add as well. As I progressed through my career, I saw my admin, or my approach to admin changing, in that I was no longer the person who was kind of the enactor of said admin. I was the person who maybe had the experience and the vision and the strategy, and then I would mentor others to help me achieve that. So I did, I guess, doing student voice type stuff helped, because that was an immediate gateway into using students as well, and getting undergraduates, getting postgraduates to help. But that approach could possibly work elsewhere as well. So if you are given something, we've as a university, we've got loads of very, very good undergraduate and postgraduates who are keen to contribute as well. And if you can be the one who kind of oversees it, you don't have to do every single thing and 100% of the output yourself. And I think it looks quite good if you can say, because it feeds into the mentorship, it feeds into the community building, student voice aspects as well.
And just to say, there is a presentational issue about, so that's why it's quite useful to go to the categories and think about how you write things up and how you present what you do. So you don't always have to do a huge amount of work to be able to present something in a particular way that ticks the box. It's showing that you've taken the initiative, you've worked through the initiative, and it's made a difference. It doesn't always have to. Some of that can be a lot more straightforward than others. That's another thing I think I look back on. I could have achieved some things much more simply by being focused.
Thank you. That's really useful advice. Amy, should we have one more of the pre-questions and another one online?
I can just see that
Candy?
Candice has got a question at the back and she's been waiting for ages.
Because I can't see behind me.
Hi, Candice, School of Math. I like that. Quick question, which might be more for Cathy and John, because we know there is a method of applying. So if your department says no, sorry, if your school says no, you can submit without school support. There's a general feeling that there's no point doing that because if your head of school has already said no, you're not going to get through the next stage. But I wonder if you can comment on whether that's accurate or whether it is worth people doing that.
Yep. I can start on that. So it's definitely correct, Candice, that most self-submissions aren't supported at faculty level. That is the pattern. But absolutely, they are considered, and if they were to meet the criteria for the panel, people would be promoted. It's like I sit in the appeals panel, promotion cases, and absolutely, some cases do get overturned at the appeal stage. Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily change the outcome because somebody may be failed in 3 criteria, and if they get upheld on their appeal for 1, they still don't get promoted overall. But absolutely, there is. I think I can remember one self-submission that was supported in my time, but I don't think it's a waste of time because the panels do look at them and say, do they meet the criteria? It's probably in other cases I've said all throughout this afternoon session, you maybe somebody in that position probably should seek some advice from others in the head of school.
I think if it is a case, it's not just on the say of the head. So the school panels are a group of people, so it's not one blocker. And the reasons why the self-submissions aren't successful is that usually they have been considered carefully by a panel against the criteria. So a self-submission, I would say, consider carefully the feedback that you've had, and if the thing that is stopping it going through can be fixed for a self-submission, then do. But it isn't being blocked on the whim of one person. There's been careful consideration and evidence for why it hasn't gone through.
Thank you. So just another one of the questions that we had submitted in advance is from Jamie Coates in Arts and Humanities. And he said, have any of the panel members held senior education roles? Being a director of education or similar role is often seen as a career dead end in terms of ACP. What advice might the panel have based on their education leadership?
I would say it's absolutely not a dead end. I looked at it and thought it would have probably been easier to make the case through if I'd have been director of education and learning than director of research in some respects, because the things that you're implementing are in some respects quite easier to measure, I think. But particularly at this moment in time in the university, I think the focus is around reorienting, reorganizing, reworking education. So I absolutely don't. I've never thought there is a disparity, but for me, some of the work in education does give you a real opportunity to show that you've made a difference, and there are plenty of ways of doing that. So I would say absolutely not. I wonder for me if it would have been easier than being director of research to make a case.
So I was director of student experience. It was when I took on the role, it was called director of student experience, but when I finished the role, it was called director of education (student experience). So it definitely went on my CV as Director of Education, bracket student experience, because it looked more important. But I 100% wouldn't have got promoted to prof if I hadn't had that Director of Education student experience role. I think the amount of leadership and sort of change and enhancement I was able to evidence from that one single role was what definitely got me over the line and ticked all the boxes. So I think it depends on an individual's approach to the role. So I think if you view it as you're just keeping a seat warm and you sit in the role for a number of years and things tick on perfectly happily, then perhaps that's not the best choice if you are actively looking for promotion. But if there is something that has areas where you can improve and you can say, that was me, I did that, and this is the impact of it, then I don't see a Director of Education role as being a blocker at all. In fact, the opposite, I think.
Okay.
Hi, apologies for coming in late. I was contributing to academic citizenship by contributing to a KU event in my faculty. So apologies if I have missed this, and this is something that's already been covered. I guess it's still going to those kind of comments around how to evidence mentorship and supporting and developing others, particularly if it's not been part of a formal role or a formal arrangement. So if these things are pretty informal, but that's something that you do kind of on the regular and you're approached, or you kind of volunteer yourself for that. How do you best evidence that and show that effect?
I think that was one of the things that I was conscious about. You could be doing a lot, and all of those things, some parts takes up a lot of time. So one of the things, and you may have missed this early, but what we all said is be strategic about it, be tactical is another word, about it, and say, it's better to do one meaty role where you can actually contribute. Yes, we could be doing all these other things, but it's nice to do. So trying to pick something that actually rocks your boat and you're passionate about and actually you can make a difference is probably better than doing lots of little things that some parts probably takes up more time and it's probably harder to evidence. That doesn't stop us from, so for example, in my case, MMIs, interviews, student interviews, that sort of thing. I do that, but it's a bit more of a when I can do. But it's nice to do the medical careers education lead, which is a meatier role where I can actually say, this is what I've been doing. I run the careers fair. I do this. So sometimes it's also being strategic about what is the thing that you can actually evidence.
So your advice would be it probably has to be a formal role.
It doesn't have to be a formal role, but I think it's something that you can actually show that you've had an impact, I suppose.
Sorry, just quickly from me. So I gained chartership with the Professional Institution of Civil Engineers in 2019, and I qualified as a mentor in 2021, and then I've been sort of, so I know it's not within the university, it's kind of external to the university, but I've been official mentor to 2 academics and 3 postdocs during that time. The reason why I did that, no personal benefit to myself, but the Joint Board of Moderators said, as a department, you need more chartered staff members teaching this degree to undergraduates who will graduate and become chartered themselves. They said to us, you need 50% of your teaching staff to be chartered, and that was put into our 5-year plan and our strategy. And I viewed that as an opportunity because I enjoyed mentoring. I was doing a lot of informal mentoring like yourself, and I thought, well, actually, here's something where I can say I have responded to a strategic need of the department, and I have done this academic citizenship-y thing and helped this many people go through this. So if there's something written down that says that your school or your unit, or I can't remember what they're called now instead of departments, if we're allowed to use that word, if there's something in a document that says our aim is to increase the number of whatever, in my case it was chartered engineers, that might be something that you can kind of work in, and you can say, well, actually, okay, that's me. I'll do that. I can mentor people. I can set up a working group. We meet once a quarter we discuss this, and yeah, so I think tying it to an action point in a strategic document is what I would suggest, if possible.
Can I just briefly add to that, what Sam said? So I don't think I've seen a P1 promotion case that doesn't say, and mentor lots of people. Everybody says that. I think Sam's right that you need some specifics. So it doesn't have to be necessarily the number, but I supported people with a promotion case. I mentored somebody to write an article. And the other obvious route actually is there's a large numbers of formal mentoring schemes at university, whether that's supporting PGRs of colour, whether that's supporting students with disabilities, etc. And being able to say I'm a member of some of those schemes, and that's what is a real concrete way of demonstrating mentoring within the institution.
And so there, I mean, there are also things that you can use for evidence. You could get quotes from people that you've mentored and put that in your CV, for example. People do that, I've seen. And you can say, you know, if you're doing mock interviews with people, or I read this many grants for other people, and things like that are all facts and numbers that you can put down to evidence it. And so, you know, those sort of things. If it's just sitting down having coffee with people regularly, that's a bit more tricky, but you can ask people to provide evidence, other academics to say, you know, it's been invaluable for my development, you know, those sort of things you can do. But there are, yeah, grants and things.
To follow up on that, does it look okay if you ask, for example, for previous people from your lab or the students to almost write a recommendation letter for you, like you do to them? Now, you know, we write recommendation letters for our students all the time. If you are putting a case for promotion, could you and would it look okay if suddenly you had the people that worked with you write a recommendation letter of yourself? How would that look like, John?
Yeah, I don't think we'd expect that, and it's always difficult, isn't it? It's like when people have got student testimony. In a case of, you know, one student said, "I am clearly the best lecturer in the university." That tends not to fly, to be honest. But I think the head of department statement is key for this. It's the one category that it's really hard to kind of self-articulate. It's very difficult to say, I'm a really collegiate person, I'm a great citizen. It's actually defined by other people. And that's why I think the head of department statement is really important. They on panels, I think that's right, Cathy, that's often the criteria where you would go straight to the head of school and they would give, yeah, they are a very good citizen, they're collegiate, they mentor. So I think that head of department statement is a really important bit there.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, and I was struck by Cathy saying that when she looks at an application, the sequence is to look at the summary, head of school, and then to the CV. So you're looking at the CV in the context of what the head of school has said. So you would be expecting your head of school to say, this person is spends a lot of time mentoring. It's that bit I had with my application, that he takes on a lot of roles and fills gaps. You know, I couldn't write that very effective. I can write it in the CV, but it's difficult to pin down. But your head of school saying it is quite powerful, I guess.
And obviously we're in bigger units now. The head of school won't necessarily know everybody individually. So I would rest assured that those head of school statements will be informed by academic line managers and so on. So I mean, it happens now that, you know, a head of, even in sort of a smallish school like my own, the head of school's statement would always have been informed by the people who worked more closely with that person. It's not one person sitting thinking, what do I know about this person? It's evidenced, and there's a gathering of evidence for them.
Should we have one more question, and then I think we'll go to our close.
I've got a question about the high quality leadership versus change and enhancement. What are the differences between those, and how do you decide whether something's high quality leadership or change and enhancement?
I would go to the ACP criteria, because the high quality management is that one where you have to hit every single box. And you know, the change and enhancement, I would take the lead from what it's saying in that, because obviously the high quality management will involve change, but it also involves other things, basically.
I said, so from a sort of pragmatic point of view, it really depends on how you write the narrative that you can make many things fit in either box. So just look at which one you're weakest on and spread it out equally, particularly if you have one large role that has lots of aspects to it. I think you can probably see how you can split things to make it look most balanced. But you could probably write the narrative for many things and to tick either one, as long as you've got enough to make both kind of full enough to pass the bar, I think.
Just on that, when I was doing the drafting with support from the head of the department, I wrote both to see how they played out. So I think that's a really good idea, is to try both, and you'll feel it will sit in one or the other. One will feel right. So I think that's one area where it is worth sort of doing the doubling up. You never lose that work either, because it gets distributed somewhere else and helps the whole thing, but it is worth doing both.
Brilliant advice as well. When I was coming to write mine, I was torn between going for management one or change and enhancement. What I did recognise was the change and enhancement. I found it allowed me to flesh out some of the other things that I talked about in other areas as well. So, as an example, a lot of the teaching that I did was about changing some of the curriculum in response to the needs of what graduating students were saying, what returning students were saying. So in terms of the teaching box, I said, well, I reviewed this curriculum and I implemented these changes. And then in the change and enhancement, I talked about why had I done that. It was to focus on employability and to focus on academic skills and those sorts of things. So I think if you can, look for the area that allows you to expand on other parts that because teaching is a big component of my job, and talking about everything I do in teaching in 250 words was quite challenging. So I was looking for areas where I could say, oh, actually, I can put more about teaching in this category. So I think just fully lean into the fact that they're not 6 distinct categories. I mean, maybe that's not fully true, but they're not fully 6 distinct categories. There are areas where they can build on one another, and you're piecing together a narrative with 6 parts to it, rather than having 6 individual sort of modules.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, so before we go to our close, we've got a quick poll, slightly to address what Sam said about making sure that we've got figures that go like this. So we've got an online one, which Amy's going to set up online, and we've got some paper copies coming around for those of you in the room. Let me know if you need a pen, and we will locate one. And while you're doing that, I will tell you about what we've got on next. So first up, thank you so much to our panel and to Cathy and John. It's been really, really useful, at least from my perspective, and I hope everyone else has found it useful as well. It's so nice to hear about your experiences, and it's been great to have some myth busting as well, to kind of bust those common misconceptions about what promotions panels might be like. So our next event, we're going to have a next event in, when's the date of it, Amy? Is it May at some point? We'll send you an email with the exact date of it. So what I didn't mention at the start of this event today, in my haste to get on to our wonderful panel members, the reason we're running this event is because when we had our priority setting activities at the start of the forum, when we first started, the ACP and support for promotion was a really common and really key thing that you asked for. So we've obviously organised this event as a start. What we've got as well is another event in May, which is going to be a really interactive activity. What we're going to do is do some training where we look at essentially rating fake applications against the ACP and calibrating. What we're then going to do is a peer review exercise. So we're going to swap summary statements. You'll get some feedback from someone both within your faculty, potentially outside your faculty as well. And essentially we'll try and start actively building up those cases for promotion and getting a bit of feedback from other people about where you're communicating your ideas effectively, where there might be gaps that you might want to think strategically about what you can take on. And all that sort of stuff. So it's basically watch this space. We'll get in touch with you again with a date and some details on that as well. I'm also aware that today we've probably had lots of questions that we haven't been able to answer. Amy will take a list of the ones in the chat. We can save that chat, can't we? And if there's any burning questions that you've got that you would really like some feedback on, do you want to send to our email address? And then what we'll do is we'll try and get some answers by the time we have that next event, and we can feed back to you as well. But yeah, if I just finish by saying thank you so much to our panel members and to Cathy and John for coming along. And yeah, we hope you found it really useful.